What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me tonight, it's Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
It's flying again, Kyle. Week 11. I mean, Thanksgiving coming up. It's crazy, but it's just a couple weeks here now, and it's going to be playoff time. So really big decisions coming up for fantasy owners this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have leagues that the playoffs start week 12. I have most of my other ones are week 13. But yeah, like we have basically you have to win the next 2 weeks in a lot of leagues in order to make sure you make the playoffs, which is, I mean, it's crazy that we're talking about that right now.
Yeah, I mean, we joked it felt like we were just doing the preseason stuff, last week, and kind of just counting down for the season, and before you know it, you blink and it's almost over. So you gotta kind of enjoy it. I think that's what happens is you kind of you enjoy the games, you enjoy Sunday, but then you spend all week basically just kind of looking forward to the next one.
Yeah.
And you do that week after week, and that's kind of how it blows right by you.
Yeah, I mean, the college football season is doing the same. Like, that's rapidly coming to an end. We're already talking about the playoffs, and bowl games will be here, and Thanksgiving's kind of the tip-off. I mean, college basketball tip off in earnest last night. I mean, time is just flying by. It's almost 2018.
Yeah, well, see, that's the nice thing, though, with the sports cycle is, it flies by, but like you said, college basketball's back. NBA, NHL in swing. It's like every time something ends, something else begins. So it's kind of the blessing there with being somebody who follows more than just one sport.
Yep, it's the blessing and the curse, I would say.
For sure.
Yeah, because it literally never ends. Let's get into it. There's a few news and notes I want to hit off the top, and then we'll do like we do every night, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers. Every Wednesday, we is kind of what we do. If you're joining us live on YouTube, make sure you are leaving us questions. If you can't make the show live, at FPAOP on Twitter, obviously at NotoriousKRO, at D_bro1389. Send us questions. We're always down to help. We're always down to answer, all that good stuff. But I guess the Zeke saga, Zeke scenario, Zeke issue, Zeke whatever you want to call it, it seems like it's finally run its course. He withdrew his appeal, his last appeal, basically because it was going to take, before they could even get it taken care of, it was going to be basically, time for his suspension to be over anyway. So it really wasn't worth pursuing. So we have 5 more games without Zeke. As a Zeke owner in a team that is looking to make the championship, that I also lost Dalvin Cook. I also lost Devonta Freeman. It's not ideal, but here we are. So we saw the Cowboys play for 1 week. Do you kind of where are you at with their running back situation and all that good stuff?
I don't think we really got much clarity. I mean, we have clarity in the sense that at least now we know, exactly the games that Zeke is going to miss. But I mean, it's like I said, I've kind of stayed away from trying to involve myself in this Dallas Cowboy backfield. So it's been amusing to kind of see how it turned out. With McFadden basically getting 1 touch after we spent 6 weeks basically saying how he was going to be the guy. But really, as a whole, this with the Tyrod Smith injury, I mean, we basically did a complete 180 where. We kind of praised the system and the line and everything and figured, whoever kind of took over for Zeke would be in such a great situation that they would be able to produce even if they weren't, a top-tier talent. And now it's the complete opposite. We saw what happened when they had to go to the backup left tackle. I mean, that offense was just an abomination. I mean, they couldn't do anything. And I know, Morris still got 53 on 11 carries or so, but it's game flow. I mean, if they can't pass protect, there's going to be a lot of 3 and outs. There's going to be, and even the Sean Lee injury, that's going to affect their defense to a point where if they're giving up a lot of points early and they have to throw, there's not going to be a running back who's going to be there to get you 15 carries. If you're saying we still have to kind of go off the guys that are there, I would put Morris still at the top because I think he's the safest bet for touches right now. But depending on, again, how the line shapes up going forward here, and if they turn into more of a passing team where we've seen Rod Smith kind of take over in that role, I don't think any of them are really going to have the upside we had hoped for previously. And I'm really not being aggressive about any one of them. I mean, I think they're fairly owned at this point, kind of people being proactive about it last week, but I'm just not interested in dealing with that situation right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as someone who is dealing with running back problems, it's not really a situation I can just avoid. I mean, there in Miami and Baltimore, we'll talk about Minnesota. Like, there's just a bunch of messy running back situations that I kind of have to pick and choose from. I think Alf is the guy. Obviously, I thought Darren McFadden would take over. That doesn't seem to be the case. I think Rod Smith is a guy in PPR formats that could be helpful. If Tyron Smith isn't playing, I mean, it could mean bad news for the Cowboys offense. I mean, we saw what it did a week ago. This week they're obviously at home, but here comes the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a pretty solid pass rush. They could be terrorizing Dak all day. If Tyron Smith doesn't play, are you basically avoiding almost all the Cowboys or all the Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dak and Dez are guys you'll probably be hard pressed to sit, just kind of given how your roster construction probably looks around them, given kind of what we've gotten from them so far this season. But aside from that, I think all those guys that were fringe plays, beforehand are kind of off the map now. Maybe you think, if they're going to be chasing points a lot more than, I guess, whether it's Terrence Williams or Jason Witten or Cole Beasley, maybe they get a little bit of a bump in deeper leagues. But I mean, if anything, it'll just be the pass game. But even in that sense, it'll be a volume. I don't think we're going to see the same efficiency we've seen from Dak, just because he's not going to have the time to throw in the situation there. I think really the more interesting question about all of this is pertaining to Zeke himself this season. If you own Zeke, are you cutting him with this news? If he is cut, are you spending any FAP to go pick him up? Kind of where do you stand on that?
I own Zeke in a couple leagues. I'm absolutely holding him. Most of those teams have championship. I guess it depends on your team. Like, if you feel like if you're 7-3 or 8-2 and you feel great and you can afford to have him sit on your bench, I absolutely do that. If you're scraping by, your half game out but into the playoffs or half game out or whatever, I would get it, but I think there's too much potential there. If he's sitting on weight, like I know Ben dropped him in the podcast league, and he was definitely a guy that I was going to pick up. Unfortunately, I was kind of in a situation where I had to pick up some guys that I had to play. And so, it really depends on your roster, but I think if there's any flexibility, you're holding another kicker or a defense or something random, a fifth wide receiver that you're never going to play, I'm absolutely fine dropping them, picking up Ezekiel Elliott and seeing what happens. What about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned the podcast league. I'm the one that actually picked them up. I had, I think, $30 of Fab left, and I put 10 of it on Zeke, so a third of the money I had left. And I mean, I'm a game out of the playoffs right now, but I think I have the second or third most points in the league. So
You only put
I feel,
$10 on it?
yeah, no, there was no other bids. There wasn't even a follow up.
Well, you mentioned it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna look at it, and I had $24, and I was like, oh, Damien has $30. I'm not gonna even bid. That was stupid. That was stupid.
It's funny because I saw you at 24, and we had brought it up in the chat, so I knew you obviously were aware that he had gotten dropped. So I actually initially considered putting 25 on him just to make sure that you wouldn't be able to get him, especially since, I mean, you're a game ahead of me there. So I figured your need for immediate help, I guess, would be a little bit lower than mine. But I mean, really, for me, it just came down to, obviously the only way this pays off is if I make it to the championship game in week 16. And it's not like my running back situation is really that bad right now. I have Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley in that league. So I'm fine there.
You're in a much better spot. I needed Jamal Williams, and I got him, and I think I spent all of my money on him. So that was part of my thing. And then let me ask you a question about this. You have David Johnson, you have Ezekiel Elliott. You can only hold one of them. Who are you holding for the fantasy playoffs and the stretch run?
I think I'd probably hold Zeke.
Just
If
because we
you
know.
were one of those, well, we know he's playing week 16, right?
Yeah.
I still feel like it's 50-50 with Johnson if he comes back at all.
Mm.
And I'm fairly confident that when Zeke comes back in week 16, he's getting 25 touches like he has every game this year. Whereas with Johnson, I can see, games where he kind of gets worked in, 6 carries here, 8 carries here, 10 carries here, because I mean the Cardinals could very well be completely out of it by that point.
I
Um,
mean, they're
so
debating Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert this week, so that tells you the state of their
right.
offense.
Right, and it's also, I mean, it's also a situation where, like you said, if you're 7-3, if you're 8-2, and you're pretty much guaranteed a playoff spot, and you feel like you have a pretty good shot at making it to the championship there, then you got to go with Zeke. I think if you're a fringe contender, then Johnson makes more sense because he theoretically could come back sooner, and you could get a couple extra weeks out of him. But really, I think the best way to put it is I'm not, if I'm fighting for a playoff spot, and I have Zeke or Johnson, I can see dropping those guys, but I want to make sure I'm dropping it for somebody that I'm going to use this week and that I feel I need to use to help me get a win. I'm not dropping them for bench depth for a guy that I might not end up, even using, and then dropping 2 weeks later for
Yeah.
whoever kind of pops on the wire that week.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. I think, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think if you are gonna potentially play David Johnson over the next couple weeks, then maybe it's worth a shot, especially if you're a little more fringe. If you feel like your team is really strong, and if Zeke could be the piece that basically seals the championship game for you, especially if you have some running backs that might be on really good teams that could be playing. Oh, that's not good. We got a disconnection. Okay, we're reconnected. So there we go. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry about that, folks on YouTube. If you're listening to us on podcast, we had a little bit of a disconnection with our live stream, but we are back. So I guess I don't know. I guess if you can lock in Zeke for that championship game, and you're looking at your running backs, and their teams could have things sealed up, and they could be sitting that game, that could be a real nice thing to have. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. This team has been purging players since the beginning. They're really trying to tank, and they just keep playing too well, and they're coached too well, so they just keep making moves, and then they trade for Kelvin Benjamin, but now they're benching Tyrod Taylor and starting Nathan Peterman, who was a train wreck last week. I don't know what the Bills are thinking. I guess if you I guess what are your kind of initial thoughts? Obviously, if you own Tyrod, he's a guy you have to cut, and then kind of how does it affect the rest of the team?
It's been a little confusing with, like you said, what the Bills have been trying to do. It seemed like they were going for a full rebuild, and then they kind of accidentally ended up 5-2. At which point, I think they still kind of saw that as a fluke and didn't actually think they'd be able to contend for a wild card spot. So, it's kind of been in the news even before this season that this kind of current regime wasn't really thrilled with Taylor. It seems like the people up in Buffalo really haven't ever bought in fully on Taylor.
No.
It seems like they're always kind of trying to find somebody else for that, which I'm not quite sure why. I mean, he has his flaws, but I think he's at worst an average quarterback in the league. And we've seen teams win with average quarterback play. If they're strong elsewhere. I don't think. I don't think Peterman. I guess in 2 QB leagues, he's probably towards the bottom of those second options. I'd have him well behind guys like Cutler and Fitzpatrick. But probably, when you get into like Blaine Gabbert and Kaiser, Savage, he's probably right there with them. So really not somebody I'm looking to acquire unless you're in like a 2 QB league and you're kind of stuck because of a guy on bye or something, and you literally only have one QB at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, he could be a guy if you're in SFB or something, where he could make sense.
Yeah, if we're looking at kind of the Bills' offense in terms of how this affects them, it's tough to say. I think it's bad for McCoy just because there's a lot of data showing us how mobile quarterbacks help running backs in terms of yards per carry. I think it's close to a half yard per carry. of a boost in terms of if you have a mobile quarterback because of the ways defenses have to respect, read option plays and just in general the ability of a guy to leave the pocket there. So I think it's going to hurt him there. But in terms of their passing game, that was never really Taylor's kind of strength. I mean, he was able to put up stats, but I know he was a guy that liked to hold on to the ball very long. Took some sacks that even despite his mobility, probably some other quarterbacks might have not taken. And he hadn't really, done much with Benjamin to this point. So maybe they feel like Peterman's a better fit for kind of their passing game. I'm definitely not comfortable saying it's an upgrade, but I also don't think it's easy as saying, oh, well, it's Peterman, so their pass game's going to suck now. I mean, I don't feel comfortable using any of those guys this week aside from McCoy. But I think if I had to bet on it, I'd say it's pretty close to where it's been.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more. Like, I think it's going to take a real step back. I know not everybody's a big Tyrod fan. I know he makes some dumb throws from time to time, but I think he's a talented quarterback, and I don't think Nathan Peterman's very good. So I think this is going to be a big downgrade.
I mean, Tyrod threw for 64 yards last week. I'll bet on Peterman to be over on that.
Yeah, well, he didn't even finish the game. They pulled him before the game was over. So, and that's not necessarily his fault. He balled out against, it started slow, but he ended up throwing for a lot of yards against the Jets. And I don't know. I just like Charles Clay. I'd be fine just because tight end's a wasteland. LaShawn McCoy, like I guess, just you have to, but I don't feel great about anybody, to be honest. And it's a good spot for McCoy too, because the Chargers defense is bad. They're the third most fantasy points to opposing rushers. So, they did just get one of their linebackers the back though, which is definitely helping. But yeah, I don't know. McCoy could feast in this spot if he gets decent quarterback play. Speaking of quarterbacks, let's talk about a few. Let's talk about Drew Brees. I know it's Drew Brees. I know, we expect a lot from him, and this season he just hasn't been that guy. And I know, I don't know. I just like this team is really run based. Ever since they started really focusing on the run, they're winning games. Sean Payton's figuring it out. He's giving the ball to Ingram. Ingram had 3 TDs last weekend. Alvin Kamara has been a beast. Are you considering benching Drew Brees at home if you have better options? Like
the key, the key there is if you have better options.
Okay, so I guess to let me rephrase this. Where are we? Where like what quarterbacks are you looking at? You're saying, wow, if I have this guy or Drew Brees, I'd rather play Drew Brees. Like how far down? Obviously Russell Wilson is probably, one of the best, if not the best matchup this week. Here, I'm pulling up quarterbacks, so I'll throw some names at you.
Well, go. I'm looking at it, and the thing is, though, is I can't. Okay, so even if you're in like a 10-team league, right? Mm-hmm. And we assume, there's probably like 2 or 3 teams that are carrying a backup. So it's hard to kind of envision a scenario where, less than 12 quarterbacks are really owned. And looking at some of the guys kind of outside the top 12 this week, kind of right on the periphery there. I mean, Phil Rivers, if he plays, Matt Ryan, Marcus Mariota, Cutler, Eli Fitzpatrick, that's kind of that, 14 to 18 range. I wouldn't play any of those guys over Brees. And if you're not doing that, then you're pretty much saying, you would have had to get somebody like Cousins or Stafford, and I don't really see that being a realistic scenario. So,
you could have Alex Smith, who has the Giants this week in a fantastic matchup. Would you rather play Alex Smith or Drew Brees?
Yeah, I could play Alex Smith, but my thing is if you had Drew Brees, I can't imagine you picked up Alex Smith week 3 or week 4 because you had Drew Brees. Maybe. So, if you have that scenario, good for you.
Week 5, Drew Brees had his bye week, so maybe you picked up Alex Smith, maybe you picked up Jared Goff. Goff obviously had Seattle that week, so maybe you didn't, but Goff's been balling out. Would you take Goff this week versus at Minnesota or Drew Brees at home?
No, it's Breeze at home, and it's not that close for me. There's no way I'm playing a quarterback at Minnesota over Drew Brees at home, especially because I don't think Breeze. If it was a case like what we saw with Newton a little bit earlier this year, or with Big Ben, where he's just playing poorly. I mean, Breeze isn't playing poorly. He's completing like 75% of his passes. He's
Yeah.
just not getting touchdowns. And I mean, just based off simple regression, yeah, I know we've already been saying in the past couple of weeks, but I don't envision the Saints going a whole season basically with like a historically low pass touchdown rate, given how often they're in the red zone. Um, it's just not something it makes sense to bet on. Not saying it can't happen, but you want to bet on the likeliest outcome. So I mean, he's due for some passing touchdowns. Everything else still looks good. So I'm not shying away from him at all if I have him.
Yeah. I don't know. I go in with lower expectations. He's probably closer to top 10 than he is like top 5 like he's been in the previous seasons. You mentioned him a little while ago, but Matt Ryan, obviously at Seattle this week. We saw Matt Ryan a season ago. Let me pull up the numbers so I can get it, but he balled out in this spot last year. We saw Deshaun Watson go to Seattle. They're obviously going to be without Richard Sherman, but Matt Ryan this year has not been the same Matt Ryan that we saw last year. So I guess if we're looking at this matchup, you're looking at Matt Ryan heading to Seattle. Last year in this spot, 27 for 42, 335 yards, 3 touchdowns. Obviously, I don't know that you can expect that based upon what he's done this year, but if you're a Matt Ryan owner, are you looking at, kind of some of the names you mentioned? Eli Manning, Phil Rivers, Derek Carr, Blake Bortles. Like, if any of those guys are floating around, are you picking them up?
Carr's the only name you mentioned there that I could see a good case for over Ryan. Just given the issues that New England still has in that secondary a little bit, but the other guys no chance. I mean, I think the key thing here is Sherman's out for the year. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know if Earl Thomas is going to play. The rest of that secondary is not good. I mean, you saw how many penalties they committed against Arizona. I mean, it seemed like every single third down it was just flag after flag after flag for holding or illegal contact or pass interference. And Ryan being a veteran, we like you mentioned last year the success he had um, in Seattle. I don't think he's going to be intimidated by that environment the way maybe a younger or less experienced QB would be. And that paired with the fact that this defense is nowhere near full strength, I'm totally fine with Ryan. I mean, he's not a top 5 play for me or anything, but I think towards the back end of the top 10, top 12 there, I definitely wouldn't take a gamble with guys like Blake Bortles or Case Keenum, anything, Jay Cutler. There's no chance I'm playing those guys over him. But Carr, I think has a shot coming off the bye here and in a good matchup.
Yeah, and the thing to remember it is in Mexico City, the elevation gets a little weird. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but the Pats were in Denver, a mile high. Now they get another high altitude game. I don't know, just something smells a little fishy. Let's talk about some more QBs. Ben Roethlisberger. The schedule coming up sets up very nicely. But so did the game against Indy where he had 236 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Hasn't looked great all year. Thursday nighter, home versus the Titans. Is Ben Roethlisberger a guy that kind of ends up in the back end of your top 10, or are you considering other options?
He's around there really just by process of elimination, but I don't feel, despite this being a really good matchup, I don't feel great about it. Part of it is just it being the Thursday game and having kind of this short turnaround here and not looking so great, last week at Indianapolis. So whereas last week I was kind of proactively trying to go out and get him with Wentz on a bye and um, Alex Smith, some of the kind of QBs you might otherwise play over him being out, but this week. I don't really love any of those options behind him, well enough to. I think it can be a toss up between him and somebody like Eli Manning, or perhaps even, Jay Cutler if you're buying into that. But I feel okay, I guess, is it's not really a definitive answer there. But I don't think I'd want him in a 10-team league, but I think in a 12-team league, I'm fine with him as a starter this week.
So Derek Carr for sure over him.
Yep,
Big Ben or Jared Goff?
Big Ben.
Big Ben or Matthew Stafford at Chicago?
Stafford. Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough matchup, but I think Stafford's just played so much better. Just kind of as a whole this year.
I totally agree, and that's pretty crazy to say. Yeah. What about Big Ben versus Kirk Cousins?
Oh, give me Cousins, even with the improved New Orleans defense.
Yeah, I know he rushed for a couple last week that kind of boosted up his total, but before then, 2 straight games of single digits, so that's not ideal. It's not what you're looking for. Yeah, I don't know. It's like it sucks because this week is the week where I'd want to kind of not play some of the bigger names for some streaming options. But like I'll give you a few names that I'm going to be targeting here in a minute. But just the streaming options it's just not a who's who of great matchups with guys that I actually would want to play. The Josh McCowns, the Tyrod Taylors, the even Jacoby Brissett. Like there's been situations where if they were playing the right matchups, I'd much rather play them over Big Ben. I guess if you're looking for safety, Ben's okay, but I don't have high expectations. Do you like Big Ben or Marcus Mariota this week?
I'll take Ben there just by a hair with the matchup.
Yeah, I am curious to see kind of how the Steelers D looks without Joe Hayden, who broke his leg, I think, and is done for the year. So that will kind of impact things. We talked about Jared Goff. I'm a little more optimistic than you are. I don't think obviously Minnesota's been really good against the pass, so I'm not rushing to put Jared Goff in my starting lineup. At the same time, he's been solid. And actually amazing. I know it's the Giants in Houston, so you got to downgrade him for sure. But he also performed against Seattle for 288. He had a good matchup against Dallas. So I think the potential for 250 and a couple touchdowns. Like I think I'd rather play Jared Goff than Ben Roethlisberger this week. But that's me.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, I don't feel great about it either way.
Yeah.
I think Goff's definitely playing better. I think Ben has the better matchup, but it's on a Thursday, so it's that one you're gonna have to just make that call on your own.
All right, so here's my streamers for the week. My article will be hitting Fake Pigskin on Thursday if you want to dive deeper. But Eli Manning versus Kansas City. I know it was not pretty last week against the Niners, but he ended up having a pretty solid day. Ended up having a good day for fantasy purposes. 273, 2 touchdowns, back-to-back weeks with double-digit touchdowns. I don't think that's a coincidence. That coincided basically with the return of Sterling Shepard. Obviously, they have Evan Ingram. This week they are facing Kansas City, a Kansas City defense that is currently, what are they? 1, 2, 3, 6th in terms of
Not
points
good.
allowed. So yeah, 6 allowed per game. So, and it's at home for the Giants, which I think gives them another little boost. So if you're looking for a streamer, if you had Tyrod, if you had some of these other guys that we've been kind of going through, like I don't know. I think I'd rather play Eli than Ben Roethlisberger. I should probably play Eli over Jared Goff, even as much as I like him. Eli versus Matt Ryan is debatable.
Eli is a doofus. I don't want him anywhere near my team. I'll take I mean, the streamers here. I mean, look, Eli, Blake Bortles, Cutler, Dalton, Keenum. I don't Bortles and Dalton. I'm just throwing out. Keenum probably too. So Eli's my favorite of this group. I'd put Cutler second, and I'd actually take Fitzpatrick third over the guys I threw out. So that's where my head's at.
Oh yeah, no, Blake Bortles I'd much rather have over Ryan Fitzpatrick. The Fitzpatrick McCown left such a bad taste in my mouth. This is a great spot for Bortles. I know it's Blake Bortles. I know. But he's facing a Browns defense that's actually been really good at stopping the run and not good at stopping the pass. I think Marquise Lee's been a thing. They're obviously terrible against the tight end, so if you need a tight end and you're desperate, Mercedes Lewis makes a lot of sense. I don't know if any of these guys are going to go Jared Goff or even like what Deshaun Kaiser did a week ago, where they just kind of break out and end up somewhere near the top 5 among fantasy quarterbacks. But I think they all have 200 to 250 and a couple touchdowns kind of in their high in their realm of outcomes.
The thing with the Bortles though is the defense is irrelevant. It's been irrelevant for his entire career. He's not bad because defenses play well against him. He's bad because if a guy runs a go route and the corner's 9 yards behind him, he'll throw it at the corner's back. So I don't think Cleveland being bad at covering the pass is helping Blake Bortles at all in this situation. I mean, some of the throws he made against the Chargers last week, I don't know what he was throwing to. It's like he had the drunk goggles on, and everybody was like 4 yards to the right of where they actually were. So you could not pay me to start Blake Bortles.
You could pay me to start Blake Bortles. Yeah,
I'm declining your money, but I can't.
You can slide up in my DMs. I'll give you my PayPal or my Venmo.
No more Bortles talk. We're moving on to running backs.
Oh, you want to talk some more Brock Osweiler? Is that what you want to talk?
Nope. Rocket ship is not cleared.
Well, we have Paxton Lynch moving up the depth chart, so Ronald is really happy about that. He's probably at home with his pants off right now. Running backs. Let's talk Baltimore. Terrence West returned to practice. Looks like he's going to be good to go for Sunday. Danny Woodhead can potentially return, although it looks like he's, they're kind of pushing him towards not playing. Javorius Allen, Alex Collins, can we start any of these running backs?
Depends who's active. If West and Woodhead are active, I'm not touching any of them. If they're both out, I'm okay with Collins, and I could even be okay with Buck in PPR. If one of them is active, I think if it's West, it hurts Collins. If it's Woodhead, it hurts Allen there. But really, the only way I'm starting any of them, I think, is if Collins and Allen are the only two that are active, because if all of these guys, at least going into the game, are have a shot at playing, then I'm taking Jamal Williams over them. I'm even taking some EJ Pirine over them. I'm taking the New England guys over them. I'm not touching this situation.
Are you taking the Dallas guys over them?
I take Morris over them. That's the only one, but I would in his case.
Yeah. So say Woodhead is active. Are you starting what's his name? Rod Smith?
In Dallas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start him over Buck Allen?
Yeah. Assuming I guess maybe the Ravens could make, I don't know. I guess they could keep them both active. It wouldn't make sense to really have all four of them, but it would be hard for me to want to play anybody in that backfield this week.
Yeah. Let's talk about Leonard Fournette, who's been kind of disappointing, and as I mentioned, the Browns are good. Have actually a really good rush D, 10th in the NFL. Only two teams have gone over 100 yards against them on the ground. I guess the state of the running back, you probably have to play Fournette, but do you have high expectations for this game?
No, I think his upside is a lot lower than it is most weeks because of this matchup and the fact that I don't know if he's still in the doghouse or what, but there was a point in the fourth quarter he really didn't play much at all last week, and at one point the Jaguars threw it on 18 straight plays in a one-score game, which is never the solution when Blake Bortles is your quarterback. I mean, I don't care if you're down
this week.
If you're down 35, you're still better off running halfback draws than you are dropping Blake back on every play. So the other situation too is I think this Jacksonville defense is just going to destroy the Cleveland offense. So there really shouldn't be a need for the Jaguars to pass much.
Who scores more points this week? Blake Bortles, the Browns offense, or the Jags defense?
Fantasy points?
Real points.
I'll take the Jags defense. give them two touchdowns.
Yeah. Maybe they throw a safety in there.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. I will not be watching much of that game. I mean, at least Bortles is hysterical. He's in a way that Tom Savage isn't. I was thinking about the Savage Gabbert matchup. That's just going to be sad. That's going to be bad football. Blake is pretty funny with kind of the things he does on a football field sometimes. So in terms of as Bill Simmons would say, in terms of the poop fecta, I'd say the Texans Cardinals is poop fecta 1A and this one's 1B.
Yeah, I got 3 TVs. I'll probably have the poop fecta on all 3 because I just love terrible games.
You just
quarterbacks.
Love poop.
A fecal matter man. Let's talk about the Chargers. Melvin Gordon has been disappointing, especially last week. We saw Austin Eckler get a big amount of carries. 16 carries for 27 yards last week for Gordon. Obviously, against New England, he was great, 132 yards and a touchdown, but 38 yards before that against Denver. The Bills' rush defense is a mess since trading Marcel Darius. Obviously, we saw what the Saints did, 475 yards and 7 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. Is Melvin Gordon, you're throwing him in there because of this matchup? And then I guess what are you doing if you own Austin Eckler?
I don't think you can start Eckler yet. It's hard to see a situation where he's going to get more than 7 to 9 touches probably. Especially we didn't talk about it, but the Phillip Rivers concussion thing. We'll see how serious that is. But if they have to play Kellen Clemens, then there's
far
absolutely
away.
Yeah. I mean Gordon, yeah, it's just he's not good. He hasn't been good, and still with kind of the state of the running back position, you just got to keep playing him because his volume projection is still going to be a top 10, top 12 guy at worst most weeks. And he gets enough use in the pass game where he's not really, game flow dependent. So I'd throw him back out there. I think the kind of emergence of Eckler, maybe we shouldn't expect to see any more of those like 28 carry Melvin Gordon games. I think his ceiling is kind of like 22 now, maybe, because Eckler should get more touches, but not enough to make him a start. And then Gordon's probably a low end number 1 still this week.
Yeah, I think if you're in deeper leagues, I think Eckler's definitely in play. It just depends on what the names you're kind of looking at. But if you're looking at would you rather play Jalen Richard or Austin Eckler?
I guess Eckler in that situation, just because Richard still has Washington.
Yeah. Would you rather say Danny Woodhead or Terrence West, one of the two were available? Are you playing Eckler over Alex Collins or Javorius Allen?
Not over Collins. I could see it over Allen if Woodhead is active.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think he's definitely an upside play, but you have to be ready for 2 carries for 2 yards and basically no fantasy points. Are we back? Where are you at with Kareem Hunt?
I mean the trade deadline I think probably is pretty close to passing, or maybe it even passed in a lot of leagues. But he's a guy I'm trying to get. I think he hasn't scored in 6 weeks. I think he came out of the gate so hot that his value was probably higher than it should have been at the start of the year. But it's kind of been slowly dropping. I think I guess the concerning thing is the touches have kind of continued to drop. But for a while there, the yards were still there.
He did have 22 touches or 22 carries versus Denver. He had 18 carries versus Oakland. So I know the game against Dallas and the game against Pittsburgh, he only had 9, which is a little concerning. But I'd say four of the past 6 weeks he's been around 20 touches. So that's good.
Yeah, it's just the Pittsburgh game and the Dallas game were fairly close games. So it was. It seemed strange that they were going away from him in situations that normally you really wouldn't be forced to. But it's not like they were getting those touches to anybody else. They were just throwing it, on every play. So I'm still fine with him. I think, he's due for some touchdown regression in terms of not having scored for so long. And, he can score on the ground. He can score in the air. I think he's easily still a running back 1 for me this week.
Yep, he was a guy I was trying to trade for. The people that own him will not move with him. And I offered some pretty good deals. So, unfortunately, I wasn't able to acquire him. But I think if you own him, definitely play him. I'm looking at the Chiefs' schedule. They have the Giants this week, a game that they could get up big and win. Obviously, Buffalo next week, where they're going to, that team is just leaking holes and, running backs are running all over them. Is Sharkhandrick West, if you're in deeper leagues, a name that could make sense if you're kind of, scraping together your running back position?
I mean, I have him in the fishbowl league. I think just basically he's a guy that if you have a deep enough bench where you have a couple spots for guys that you're never going to use, but they're basically an injury away from becoming an RB, too. He's kind of the guy you want to do. Actually, I did that with Eckler. 2 weeks ago, I think, as well, where just pick him up in case the guy ahead of them gets hurt. But I don't think he's ever going to be a situation where he's going to be even a flex play as long as Hunt is still there.
Yeah, like I think against Buffalo he could make sense, and like if I don't hate him, if you're trying to avoid terrible situations, like I feel like he'll at least get a solid amount. And we've seen what they kind of go away from Kareem Hunt. So even if they do like 18 and 10, or next 2 weeks could make sense. So if you're in deep leagues, if you're in leagues where like I'm in a 16 team league where we start 3 running backs, four receivers, and 2 flex spots, like he could make a ton of sense right there. Let's talk about your team, Damian. What are the Patriots doing with their running backs, at least for this week and next, and then before Bill Belichick changes his mind and completely redoes the progression in the order?
I have no idea. I don't. I mean, I don't mind it because I think that this is never a situation that appeared to have clarity really, or enough clarity where you would kind of feel comfortable betting on one of these guys. I think it's interesting that kind of Burkhead came back and was so involved. They obviously like his versatility, but he basically kind of replaced James White as the pass catching guy. I know White had the touchdown, but I think he only played 11 snaps or so. Burkhead also saw 10 carries, I think. Dion Lewis, it still seems, is their early downs running guy. And essentially their goal line guy, with Gillislee being inactive last week. We'll see if he's inactive again. I think it's interesting that they don't seem to throw the ball to Lewis at all anymore, given kind of how he burst onto the scene as a receiver in his first year with the team. So just chaos, but I think the fact that they essentially have 3 running backs that are good enough to be like primary third down pass catching backs and are basically just taking turns rotating them in the ground game. I don't feel great using any of them this week. I think I'd probably let's just, instead of just breaking it out, let's just say like half point PPR to kind of bridge the gap there. I'd probably have it. I can't rank Gillislee, so between the other 3, I'd say I'd have it. Lewis, Burkhead, and White right now. But I mean that can. The one thing is James White isn't going to get very many carries, and Lewis isn't going to get very many catches. I think Burkhead seems to be kind of the hybrid guy there, where he could get enough of each to kind of make him probably perhaps the most appealing play. But then you saw Lewis take a kickoff to the house last week, so you get a little bit of a boost there. So. I think in deeper leagues, all 3 of those really are kind of playable, especially in PPR. But I don't think the gap between all 3 of them is really that significant.
Yeah, I think Dion Lewis, like I'm happy to play him. I think they're doing some interesting stuff with Burkhead, and if they kind of put him in that Edelman role, especially if we're talking about receivers here in a little bit, but Chris Hogan's still banged up, might not play. We saw Martellus Bennett get on the field and kind of do stuff last week. Do you think he has obviously he's, not an elite guy with Gronk there, but, do you think he has enough where he kind of impacts what could be, passes to the running back and passes to, other receivers? Like, do you think he gets a handful of targets each week?
I mean, he'll get a couple, but I think they just want him there because he knows the system from last year. He's a really good blocker, and he's a good replacement for Gronk, because of the fact that he's a complete tight end there. If anything were to happen to Gronkowski, which most years it does. So I think it's more of kind of a depth thing than it is, although this guy's all of a sudden going to get 5 targets a week. So I don't really see him taking away that many looks from anybody else here, and I certainly don't think he's fantasy viable yet.
Let me ask you a question. I got a move in my 16 team deep league that I was just talking about. Should I drop Darren McFadden and pick up Terrence West?
No. I mean, you should drop McFadden, but you got to be able to find somebody better than West.
There really isn't. There really isn't. We can finish that up later. We'll talk more. Let's talk about Vikings running backs. Obviously, Latavius Murray has had moments, but this week they're facing a Rams defense that's gotten much better especially over the past few weeks. Aaron Donald seems to be rounding into form. Is Latavius a guy that if you own him, you're okay playing? Do you think maybe we see a little more Jerick McKinnon this week? Kind of where are you at?
They're both flex plays. Maybe even RB2s, really, depending on the size of the league. I mean, Murray's not great, but you have to like the work. I think the last 4 weeks, essentially, he's hovering right around 15 touches, which on an offense that moves the ball and is going to get red zone chances, it's really hard not to play somebody with that type of touch floor. And McKinnon's still the primary passing down guy. He's the guy that's more explosive, and he might not be the goal line back, but he does get usage in the red zone. So I'm totally fine with him as well this week.
Yeah, yeah. I don't feel great about either, but like you said, I'm probably fine with them. Let's talk about the Dolphins, guys. Is Kenyon Drake kind of the guy for you now, or do you think it's gonna fluctuate on a week to week basis?
No, I mean, Williams still outsnapped them last week. I think Drake has the one big play, which people remember, but they were aside from that, they were both pretty bad. And I think Williams is still the guy they want on there in passing downs and in pass protection. So I prefer Drake to Williams now, I guess, a little bit, but they're both low in flexes.
Yeah. So rank them. Who's your top two options from the Vikings? Anyone not named Deion Lewis and the Patriots? Any of the Ravens guys? Any of the Cowboys? Austin Eckler? Any of the other kind of randos we've talked about?
It's McKinnon. McKinnon is definitely a step above all those guys, and I'd probably put Burkhead second.
Yeah, I'm probably with you. McKinnon's probably the guy. Burkhead, if you're in PPR, I think if you're in standard, Eckler could make sense, just because he has that one big play and gets a touchdown. But yeah, I don't know. It's in there. He's in a great matchup, so that would probably be my thing. Char West probably fits right in there too. Let's talk some receivers. So Will Fuller is still dealing with the ribs issue. I don't think. Do you expect him to play?
No, and I really don't care if he does or not. I'm not using him.
Yeah. Are you using any Texan not named DeAndre Hopkins?
Nope. No chance.
No chance. Let's look at some receivers. Is there any guys that stand out to you as either amazing plays this week or guys you're looking to stay away from?
I think looking at the slate this week, maybe kind of the overriding narrative here is so we have guys, like Robert Woods, for instance, right? He's been outstanding the last 2 weeks, or Marquise Lee, but they have some pretty tough matchups. Woods with Minnesota there at Minnesota, and Marquise Lee.
I think Marquise Lee is going to feast this week. Allen Hurns is banged up. Obviously, Allen Robinson is gone. I know they're Blake Bortles targets, but I think you could have like 15 targets, catch like 7 for 90, and maybe even find the end zone.
I mean, if he can get away from McCourty, maybe. If McCourty's on him, I can't imagine he gets even half of that, because McCourty's been terrific this year. So if that's really what that comes down to. But I think if McCourty's on him, then I don't feel great about Lee. We'll see who Minnesota puts Rhodes on.
I was talking about that on the Bull Rush bets about where Xavier Rhodes is going to play. Like Robert Woods, I feel like Xavier Rhodes is a little bit thicker, so I don't know if he wants to try and get Woods or how that works.
Yeah, but if they keep Kupp in the slot, which they have been, they're not putting Rhodes in the slot. If they keep Rhodes outside, it's between him and Watkins. And I just right. I mean, Watkins gets 2 targets a game. That just seems like a waste to put Rhodes on him. So,
so is Bobby Is Bobby Woods on your bench this week?
No, I can't sit him. Just given, I mean, I can't expect 150 yards again like the last 2 weeks, but I think you still have to play him. I still think he's at worst a wide receiver 3. So in most leagues you're playing him. I'd probably play him over. It's close, but I'd probably play him over Marquise Lee. I think a couple other interesting guys this week I think are Marvin Jones with kind of the huge goose egg we saw from him last week after that terrific stretch before, and Devontae Adams. Kind of seems. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's talk about the Packers in general because I think that's a great idea. Because I think Devonta Adams is a guy I'm comfortable playing, but I'm not playing Jordy Nelson.
No, I totally agree on that. I've benched kind of all my Nelson shares, which I have quite a few of for this week. I would definitely prefer Adams to him. I still don't really have Adams more than kind of a high end number three, just because I respect that Baltimore defense, and I don't. I mean, it's he's definitely the guy from what we've seen with him and Hundley in terms of the connection they have there. But it's still not anything I'm really excited about. So it's not. I mean, really outside kind of the top like 18, 20 plays. It's not a great week in terms of there's not really any plays that jump out. I mean, even guys like Rashard Matthews, I think that we've been, kind of using, or Mohamed Sanu,
Hmm.
they don't have the best of matchups
What about Jeremy
this week.
Maclin? He's 60% owned. He's got Green Bay this week. He had 9 targets a week ago, caught 8 for 98, 3 for 53 and a touchdown the week before that. Back to
I
back.
just, it's Flacco. I don't. I mean, I don't. I
It
like.
seems like, but if you look at if you just kind of ranked him with the rest of the league, like if you think about Nathan Peterman, Drew Stanton, Blaine Gabbert, Tom Savage, like the quarterbacks that are playing, Joe Flacco looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, he looks better. I wouldn't say he looks good. How about that?
Okay. He
I honestly, I think. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I know, but we have to start somebody. Like we can't just bench all these guys.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, these guys. I mean, you're already starting, but I like that Tampa Miami game. I think Parker Jackson. Those guys are gonna have big games. Um, Obviously, Mike Evans is going to be back, but still. And then I think Jamison Crowder. What we've seen from him lately, I think he's kind of going back to being that primary target.
Yep.
In Washington. But yeah, I mean, look, all those guys, like you said, even Sanu, Cooper Kupp, they're guys that like they don't have the upside in these matchups, but they can still give you 5 for 55, which is it should be sufficient with kind of the difficult matchups you have here. So again, just kind of try to piece it together, I guess. And see where you can exploit it there. But let's move on to tight end here. What are you thinking of for tight ends this week?
Let's take a look. Obviously, Travis Kelsey is probably one of my favorite plays if you're playing DFS. Like he's got the Giants. Like I know I don't like to pay up a tight end, but if I'm playing DFS and I'm paying up, Kelsey's definitely a guy that interests me. Do we expect Zach Ertz to play?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a full go. He had a full practice today, so everything's looking good there with him.
Nice. Cameron Brate, are you comfortable rolling him out this week after back-to-back one-catch games?
Yeah, I know the last 2 weeks have been really bad for him. It hasn't really made any sense, but I think you have to do it. I still think. I mean, the Miami secondary stinks. I think he and Jared Cook are kind of two guys that outside of kind of that big top five, with Kelsey and Gronk and Ertz and Jimmy Graham, you probably Evan Ingram now with kind of how consistent he's been. Once you get beyond that top five, I think Brait and Cook are actually two guys that I think are in that next class for this week. With Cook, it's been he's been really good the last 2 weeks, whereas Brait hasn't. But I think I have them pretty close together there, and I think if Reed is out again for Washington, then I think Vernon Davis easily becomes another top 10 play. He's just been so consistent in the games that Reed has been out for.
Yeah, and it sounds like Reed could play this week, so kind of keep an eye on that. If you're a Reed owner, I would highly recommend just owning Davis because that's an easy swap. Just a reminder, expectations is Greg Olsen will return next week. So if he's floating around in your waiver wire, he's only 64% owned. I think he's a guy that you can definitely add and definitely play. I like Tyler Kroft. I know the past couple weeks haven't been great in terms of workload, but he did get 6 targets a week ago. I think he'll be fine. Denver is bad against the tight ends, so there should be opportunities there. Nowhere near Kobe Fleener, obviously. Are you okay with Charles Clay?
No, no. Between I mean, last week was kind of the week to kind of shake the rust off, but I'm not going in blind with Nathan Peterman. So I think Hooper is who I kind of like in that range outside the top 12. He's been getting a lot more work lately, and like I said, that Seattle matchup doesn't look as intimidating as
Yeah,
it did,
we
a couple weeks ago.
yeah we can't play any San Diego Chargers or L.A. Chargers or any Chargers, Dodge Chargers. Hunter Henry is just wildly inconsistent. Surprisingly, Jared Cook has actually been pretty solid. He seems to be getting a reliable amount of targets. He's got over 100 yards in 2 of his last 3 games. I think he's a name that if he's floating around or you own him, definitely can play him this week.
Yeah, no, I have him right up there outside the top 5 there with Brait, that we mentioned earlier. So definitely in on that. And yeah, I mean that's tight end. It's tight end for you every week. It's kind of try to pluck a couple of those guys upside, outside of the top 12.
and,
Um,
and like I said, I don't think Mercedes Lewis, like if you're desperate, if you've been just kind of picking and choosing random tight ends in good spots, I think he could be a guy that makes sense.
yeah. Let's throw some defenses out here before we get out of here. I
Just
think
pulling up. That's what I was just pulling up.
if we're looking at a couple probably that might have been dropped, aren't as highly owned, but have good matchups this week. I think the Cardinals going into Houston and Tom Savage, and really both defenses in that game. I know the Texans defense has been terrible, but Blaine Gabbert, coming in hot off the bench there. Not too excited about that. I think Cincinnati and Denver is another game where both of those defenses I think could be in play. They've both probably been dropped. I think
it's surprising how much Denver is available. I think they're definitely a team that people are kind of overreacting to.
Well, the overreaction is they just don't get fantasy points. You don't get points for being a good defense if you're not creating turnovers and scoring touchdowns, which is kind of what the Broncos have been doing this year. So I like him this week, but I can see kind of why that's been the case. I think the Seahawks are one that I might drop this week just because of the guys that they have injured there. And then
I like
a couple. Go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say the Eagles and the Rams are 2 defenses that I think they're highly owned. The Eagles may be a little bit less with the bye now, but I think people might not be very high on them this week because of the matchups. But if I own those defenses, I think I'm starting both of them still. I think with the Eagles, especially if Smith is out for the Cowboys, they're going to get so much pressure up front that it's probably going to be worth it. And same thing with the Rams. I know that Minnesota just put up however many 38 on Washington or so, but it's still Case Keenum and it's still an offense that has some issues that I think the Rams could exploit. So I wouldn't be trying to drop them just for this week.
Yeah, the Chargers are widely available in facing Nathan Peterman this week. I think they're a team that makes a ton of sense. And the player I was thinking about, Denzel Perriman, is back, so that's helped their run defense. I could see Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram just living in the backfield and racking up all the sacks. I mean, I don't know. Pittsburgh makes a ton of sense, but they're probably owned. I don't know that I hate Tennessee in a game that on a Thursday night could get weird. What do you think about Cleveland? You obviously think Blake Bortles is pretty terrible. I think he could, throw some turnovers. Maybe Fournette doesn't run very well, and the Browns are a defense that doesn't kill you.
I mean, it's a dart throw. I guess that's something I might think about in DFS because I'm sure they'll be dirt cheap. But I find it hard to imagine you can't find a better option in season long.
Okay, so let's talk about some people that are 60% or less. So Arizona, New Orleans, Chicago versus Detroit, the Chargers, Atlanta at Seattle. Who's your favorite? Who's your second favorite?
Arizona's probably my top one there. And probably the Chargers. We don't know what's going to happen with Peterman. You might as well take him at home. They're going to be able to get some pressure.
Yeah, I flip them, but yeah, Chargers and then Arizona I think is your best bets. I think it gets the job done. So, all right, Damian, this was a lot of fun. Good to catch up. Good to talk some fantasy. make sure you are following Damien on Twitter. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO for myself, D_bro1389 at FPAOP on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the iTunes feed. Rate and review the show. Let us know what you want to see. We're always here. Hopefully, we're going to help get you ready for the playoffs next week. I think Ronald and I will be doing a playoff preview. I know things get a little wonky with the holidays, so we'll try and get these shows out to you. But until then, we will talk to you guys next week.